Soon may the wellerman come, bring us coffee, tea, and rum. One day when the tonguing is done, take our leave and go. At a fair in the sun of town, her hair was blonde and her dress was brown. Soon may the wellerman come around.
Following a successful float test of my newly completed 8-foot pinewood pram, she turned out to be a success. She was pretty tight, very stable, and tolerable to row, though definitely not what you'd call fast. It is an 8-foot pram after all. I put some thought into the design, even building several cardstock models, but the boat itself was kind of thrown together in a hurry with less than the best materials, so I was really surprised how good a boat it seems to have turned out to be. Her bones were cut from cheap knotty white pine, and the bottom is just plain old 3/8 plywood sheathing, not the best grade at all. So it'll be interesting to see how those materials hold up over time. Having confirmed her sail worthiness, I was ready to get to work on the sailing gear, and probably the most important thing would be the rig itself. And rather than investing too much time and money into a rig before I really know how the pram is going to sail, I figured I would just stick with the 31 square foot lug sail that I use in my 12-foot skiff. Actually, that rig is probably better sized to the pram than it is to the 12, even though it drives the 12 just fine. I sketched out a very primitive single piece rudder on this old 1x12-inch board, and this board does have some character. It would have made really nice seat stock actually, but it was a short piece and it had a couple of bad knots in it that I was able to cut around for the rudder and was splitting out at one end, so I figured this is as good a use as any. I happen to have a set of race light stainless pintles and gudgeons laying around, and those will be just about perfect for this pram. The single piece gudgeon is kind of nice because it eliminates a little bit of work in aligning gudgeons. It's just a matter of determining the right height to hang it on the transom, squaring it up, and driving 4 screws. Using through bolts and nuts would be a better way of installing this gudgeon, but wood screws will be just fine for my purposes. The pram has a very hard chine and an almost perfectly flat bottom at the midsection, and the top sides are nearly vertical with a flare of a mere 5 degrees. Combine that with a pretty deep skeg, and I figure the boat's going to have some good sailing ability as far as lateral resistance without the addition of a dagger board. So I'm going to try sailing her just like that at first and see how it goes. I may experiment with a lee board at some point. Using a lowly hole saw, I cut out a circle where the mast will pass through the bow thwart and down into a step that will be screwed into the bottom planking. I've often heard fine woodworkers scoff at the hole saw, but I've actually found it can make perfectly nice looking holes with a little finish work, and the main issue is to prevent the circle from busting out and splintering on one side. You start drilling from the top of the board and flip it over and finish completing the hole by drilling from the opposite side. In this case, I'm not really worried about the bottom side of the hole splitting out because you're never going to see it. It's on the bottom of the thwart. Arriving at my preferred testing grounds, a small lake adjacent to the Cumberland River's Lake Barkley Reservoir, the rig is looking right at home on the little pram. It's almost the perfect size for it. Due to the high upswept bow of the pram, it ended up there really was not a lot of distance between the mast partner and the mast step, which meant that the unstayed mast would not have adequate support, I thought, it was a little bit wobbly. So my solution, or at least a temporary fix, was this simple lashing, which is basically a line that starts on an eye on the bow, gets wrapped around the mast and tensioned up, pulled back through the eye, and cleated off on the mast, and that really seemed to take the wobble out of it. In the future, I may consider raising the bow thwart or adding a wooden ring that the mast passes through to further support it. In my excitement, I forgot to install one final cleat, and so the halyard is looking a little sloppy, sharing a cleat with the lashing. As the wind picked up, I was pleasantly surprised to see how wonderfully the little Pram sailed. The helm even felt pretty neutral and balanced, and I did basically zero calculation to merit that. It's interesting how each wooden boat has a different resonance under sail, almost like a string instrument. Yet another pleasant surprise. Turning upwind, the Pram was holding a beam reach very solidly, making almost no leeway, despite her only semblance of keel being a simple skeg. The frothing bow wave makes you feel like you're really scooting along, but in reality, that's probably an indication of a short and inefficient hull. Nearing the northern shore of the lake, just across the width, I decided to turn this test into an adventure, setting a course for the spring at the back of the lake. may end up having to eat my words about the balanced helm. At some point, I noticed I was having to apply considerable helm to weather. I don't know exactly what was causing it. Maybe the still slightly wobbly mast, boat trim, sail trim. It's hard to say at this point. I still haven't fully gotten a feel for the way the Pram sails. Waves that would be no more than a ripple for my bigger boats felt like giant rollers out at sea to this little boxy Pram. It was kind of fun. Sailing past several small islands, I finally come into the shadow of the wind, and that's about as far as I can go under sail. I switch over to the oars and begin making my way to the spring through a winding maze of narrow passages and small creek channels. The spring emerges from this large rock in the hillside and flows into the creek. The water is cold and clear. It's a nice place just to cool your feet on a hot day like this. I sailed about a mile downwind of the launch, and now it's time to return. And the wind is actually howling pretty good. This is the part where the Pram reveals perhaps its greatest weakness. Rowing directly into the swell, she pounds terribly and is really difficult just to keep moving. If you stop rowing, you get turned around pretty quick. This pounding is sort of to be expected for such a short boat with a broad, flat bow, but I'm used to rowing pretty efficient, pointed skiffs, and they don't suffer from this problem. Definitely not nearly to this extent, even flat-bottom skiffs, so it was a little bit of a shock to me. It definitely took some effort to get home, but it was bearable. Pennants are now available at cumberlandrover.com. Historically flown for signal purposes, a pennant is that indescribable something that your boat is missing. They can help you read the wind, increase visibility of your small craft, and they just look cool, fluttering from the masthead or yard of a lug sail. You can have any color you want, as long as it's bright red. I have 2 styles of pennant now available at cumberlandrover.com.